single euro payments area for 2 decades. Are we actually getting the right point after 20 years? Because shouldn't we be talking about a single global payment?
Globalization, and by the way, talking about, let's say, the turn of the tides, we started, all of us started in a national environment. Then we moved to here into Europe, regional. In some spaces might be global, but actually if you see what's happening right now in the world, it's rather going to be regional than it's going to be global. The question is also, do you need a single global payments area, or can you connect big, let's say, frameworks that are being implemented all over the world? If you now look at, imagine everybody's instant in, let's say, 2 or 3 years. And you have a layer on top. And yes, I'm also a deputy chair of SWIFT. And SWIFT is able to connect all these dots together with their international layer. Then we're done. So let's not make it too difficult. Let's do it first here, everywhere. And let's do this within, let's say, 1 to 2 years. And then see what happens around us.
I think if you start to look at what was the birth of SEPA, it was really how do you take 28 countries and sort of make the citizens feel like one. So that was more how to sort of ramp up from local to regional. I think today the question is even more relevant because it is, as Mark says, a regional one, right? It's, yes, is there already a global SEPA? Well, that's exactly the USP of a player like Mastercard, right? Particularly in cards, right? So this is what we do well. We wake up every day. This is how we think about it. We make it work, right? So the question really on is SEPA still relevant? Is it more real? I think it's more relevant today than ever, right? Because when we really think about what regulators are asking many of us to worry about, it's really around European sovereignty, right? And so that's an answer of regionalism rather than sort of interoperability globally. The whole combination of where we are today is really just, you know, allowing, like we've talked a lot today about consumer choice and giving people opportunity to feel safe, secure, and I love the point on trust. We're all in the business of trust, right? But the reality of that is that there has to be sort of guard breaks on that. And yes, SEPA started out, how do you make 28 actors one? We still got to make that one work, right? And then how does that one then work with the rest of the world? And I think, you know, if we're really going to be provocative, right? Because, you know, you say ICS, International Card Scheme, you use it as a pejorative. We're not a pejorative. We kind of make you and your institutions and your customers happy. And there's plenty of new competition coming through the fore. But I do think the new frontier is really more around, you know, moving money quicker, right? And it is about instant payments. And the moment you move instant payments quicker, which is really a technological solution with the cybersecurity, the safety, and all of that on top of it, you're actually also deleveraging the risk, which I think is also something all of us are very interested in as well, right? The moment the money moves quicker, you know, the risk decreases. So those are my thoughts.
Do you think in 20 years from, or 10 years from now, let's start with 10. In 10 years from now, do you think we'll have our single European payment scheme? And maybe even more important, do you as a retailer really care?
Well, to be honest and to talk a little bit about my personal journey, I worked on all the projects of the checkout at the retail side, POS and e-commerce, and in Europe, across Europe. I can assure you that if you want to roll out a new mean of payment in Europe, it's really a pain. And before that, when I was on the other side, to be honest, I did not understand anything about payment. As a retailer, I was lost, totally lost. Then I flipped to the Carrefour Bank, so I heard about issuing and so on, and now I'm well aware, of course. But again, first of all, as a consumer, I would love to find my preferred mean of payment, the one I trust to, available everywhere. Bizum, for example, if I can use this kind of payment everywhere, wow, why not? Payconic or whatever. But it's not possible yet. Anyway, as a retailer, I need to accept this mean of payment because they are very famous. They are very popular in their country. So I can't have one single solution. We call it SEPA. We call it's European, but I always have to adapt somehow. So yes, I would love to have this. And also maybe I think that having a strong European actor here will help merchants to fight against the rise of the interchange. Sorry about that, but need to be said. So we need to have this champion here. And also, it's a matter of, when we are talking about SEPA or scheme, it's also a matter of arbitration, rule, and all the connection between merchant, consumer, and institution. So yes, it could work having that.
You, of course, look as a global player, you look at the payment landscape and all its competitive dynamics. We have global payment giants across the world. We have PayPal, we have the GAFA. I mean, we talked about quite a few of them. Where do you see the first European payment giant emerging? And do you see one emerging?
So I think consumer preference is the theme. We want to make sure that everybody has the ability to pay in a safe, secure manner. And I think where we've seen challenges is that has essentially become more local than ever before. So you have the rises of wallets, digital wallets. So you have the US, you have consumers saying, I feel more secure paying with my Venmo account. They come to Europe and then they can't pay by Venmo. They're saying, oh, I can't use this. How do I make that payment? And Europe is a big statement because you have multiple countries that make up Europe, and you go into the Netherlands, and we were actually just there last week for Money 2020, and a lot of my colleagues were like, what's ideal? I want to learn about it. I'm like, it's been existing in Europe for such a long time, and it's actually one of the better schemes out there. So I actually think that we're moving into a space where consumers are more local in their thinking, and they're using either their local schemes to make transactions, since that's what they're familiar with. But the world is back open and everybody's traveling, and we're getting to a point where these schemes need to essentially be better interoperable. And I think SWIFT and the financial market infrastructures around the world taking the lead from Europe and using ISO 20022 XML is a great step, because we as financial institutions finally have a common language to speak to each other. I think that there's more we need to do. I think this is looking back 20 years, we've come a long way. I think we've seen a lot happen in the last 18 months alone, but there's still that need for the consumer to feel comfortable in what they're used to paying and thinking about that in a more global scale, because countries around the world are all doing their own instant payment schemes, their own wallets are coming out in the commercial space, and it's actually becoming more fragmented than it's ever been before.
Do you see a European competitor to whatever European global payment champion emerging? Now, I think Sarah's pointing at solutions and systems that emerge out of Europe, SWIFT being one of them, although they're global. But do you see a corporate competitor, like a multi-corn, or how they call them, this hedgehog, that would emerge from Europe?
Yeah, we typically then tend to think about, let's say, the World Pays and those kind of guys, and then everybody looks at Adyen, that's a big thing. But let's not forget that a few of the extremely large processors are also sitting here, right? And actually they make more money than the guys who are sitting up front. At least they make more money than I do. So think about the world lines of this world, also just here on this stage, and the Nexis, etc. These are pretty large companies, and there you can see actually that in the infrastructure world, consolidation has already taken place. Will, by the way, continue further, and further to what you're saying, yes, I see also much more fragmentation, and you cannot ask the whole world to bank on one single thing, but what you see, the consolidation in the infrastructure in the meantime has been going on quite rapidly. And that is probably what unites us. And so it doesn't really matter how you enter the infrastructure. You need to have protocols, you need to have standards by it, but the consolidation on the back end has already gone. Do I really see let's say, a European Apple, Google, whatever arise? That is pretty difficult. That's also a bit of our culture, a bit modest. So I don't know if it's purely payments driven why we are so modest. But maybe, yeah, we see a few small unicorns here and there, a number of unicorns in Berlin. You see them here in Brussels, you see them in the Netherlands, the Nordics, don't forget the Klarnas of this world. Yeah. But they tend not to make it, let's say, in the hundreds of billions in terms of evaluation. And the question is, what is causing that? Is it our culture? Is it a way that we're completely fragmented? If you look at Europe, where, well, Europe is a set of countries. By the way, the US is a set of states. Right. You can also have a debate about that, how difficult and different that is. So in that sense, there's still much to gain. There will be a European giant. By the way, the ECB, don't underestimate how big the ECB is, and if they start making the CBDC, Evelien, then they might become the largest giant that we have here.
What can we expect in terms of what it will do and what it will look like? And then CBDC meaning, in first instance, digital euro, of course.
Yeah. So I think it's needed, one, because we need certainty. We need certainty in terms of how people are going to engage in the crypto space and understand how to deal with crypto assets. And we also have to be honest with each other. The reason why the regulators feel uncomfortable is this is an unknown element. So CBDC really basically is stablecoin. So why don't we do it, and why don't we do it quickly, right? It'll just bring that certainty and that stability to the market that we need. This is, I think, is the future, whether we like it or not. It's just how we're going to be embracing it, right? We need to ensure that, the basic things of, can I trust? Will this work? If there's a problem, how do I resolve it, right? So that stability of it is so crucial. I think CBDC is needed. I think we need to move quick. I think it'll bring certainty to the marketplace. It's going to be really interesting to see how regulators sort of deal with sort of what's happened the last 4 or 5 weeks and how consumers also...
The topic of embedded finance is, of course, a very important one in the narrative today, which means that actually payments and other pieces of finance are disappearing in what people do in their daily lives, buying stuff, going to retailers. How do you see that evolving in Europe, and what role do you see also for retailers to actually grab a bigger part of that experience?
I think that there is 2 aspects here. First of all, how to achieve the embedded finance. I mean, when we did that in Carrefour, for example, creating a payment, electronic payment institution and so on, the step is so high to have the license, to create the organization around it, the compliance. The economical model is totally different. I mean, on the retail, it's flow, for example, on credit, because it was credit, it's more stock. So very, very new. So the step is very high. So you have to partner for that. You have to partner, and to partner with people that goes straight to the point. So it's more fintech, entrepreneur, you know, very small company that can help, because they simplify dramatically the access to payment complexity for the merchant. But, and again, the last point is merchant should be at the heart of the whole payment ecosystem evolution. We have so many contact points to the customer. We know where he's going. We know what he's buying, to help on fraud also, for example. But we are really dealing with him. And when something is not working, even in payment, he's complaining to the merchant, not to the bank, to the merchant. So we have this material. So we have a lot to bring on the table on all this payment activity and regulation.
What I now hear is, Isabelle, merchants will be at the core. The brands will represent the trusts. We have fintechs that make the experience super, super convenient. Mark, Sara, where would the banks be in 10 to 20 years from now?
What I believe is that some of the banks, and maybe not necessarily always the larger banks, but the banks are well positioned in some of the countries that are operating internationally, that have a certain skill, have a choice to play, whether or not. Others simply don't have a choice anymore. They have to take a step back and take that layer in the hands of somebody else. So as a bank, by the way, you do have to, anyhow, have to make choices, because you can't invest in everything anymore. You need to decide. Do you want to be really good in one product? Do you really want to be good towards your customer? Or do you really want to be good in operational terms? So in that sense, the answer is, yeah, for some of us, it will end and will stop here. For others, they will continue to play the role. So maybe that's a countervailing power, and maybe the power will then not come from the banks, but will come from political institutions.
I don't believe that banks will be absolutely everywhere, joining every single clearing, but I do think that banks will be going up the value chain. So the conversations earlier today around digital ID and biometrics and all of that, where do you feel secure keeping your information? Is it with a fintech that you Googled online, or is it essentially your bank who already has that information for your bank? I see the commercial banks playing the value and knowing the KYC, knowing the individuals, down from the financial institution, down to the individual person. And I think that's still a very important role for us to play. I also think that banks are being smart about where they're investing and how they're joining clearings around the world, and partnership models are important. The banks have been protecting individual information since they started. So I do still see a very valid role for banks in this space.
Any perspectives of what the future of crypto assets in trade and payments would be in Europe?
I mean, we're also early in this game, right? So we're just developing standards on really digital assets ourselves, right? So we made a few announcements this year that, hey, we're going to sort of allow the network to be open to that. The risk is there anyway. You know, it's just then how do you sort of, you know, create the right infrastructure? And we're going to be expensive compared to some of the other players out there. So we're not going to be everybody's choice, right? But we will be that choice about certainty, the frictionless elements, and most importantly, the trust element.
Is there something that we should bring back to the Commission and to the European Central Bank as saying, like, why don't we first fix this before we do the next PSD?
So let me tell you a small story, and this was not what I prepared. Who is driving an electric car? Can you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Average range 300 to 500 kilometers, something like that. Have anybody ever used it to drive to your holiday destination across Europe and crossing 4 countries? I can assure you that if you want to load your electric car and you go from the Netherlands, you drive to Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Spain, there's no way you can load your car with one card. You need different apps, you need different cards, you need different things, blah, blah, blah. It is truly amazing. And one of the things, and that's really, I find it really a pity that I'm no longer in the EPC. I would put this number 1 on the agenda next time. Call Jason, call Visa, call all the others, but we might create an A2A account solution. First, Olivier, I know you're trying to be, yes, you're right, we need to solve so many things, and the Commission, I think, is slowly, surely understanding, but they're also organized in silos. So he needs to go to his tax colleagues and the others, etc. But keep on pushing in that part. But in the meantime, if we just, guys, it would be fantastic in the coming 2 years that you solve this thing. If not, I need to go back to a full hybrid or a full whatever car. So thank you.
What change in payments in the next 10 years would you hope for? What is the aspiration you would bring? I think you already brought yours.
I'm pleased if all the loading stations will work. But and whether it's request to pay or instant payment, I really don't care. If it's a card infrastructure, I don't care.
As long as it works.
Solve it.
Yes. Jason, starting with you. What would be your hope and what would it change for you?
Well, it does really come down to sort of realizing instant payments, right? Because we only have cards to sort of get that millisecond element, right? To give that authorization. We have technology today that sort of moves that forward. So yes, I want to be in that place, and I am working on that. And the payment is frictionless. I just want to engage and move on, right? We understand that. That's where we're going.
Thank you. Isabelle, what would you hope for?
I think I agree about the instant payment. We need really to improve and to accelerate the rollout. And I think also that tomorrow maybe there will be the new mean of payment are coming more from the usage of what we want to do. It's not the mean of payment itself, it's the usage. And maybe tomorrow there will be, for example, more and more IoT, or the objects are going to pay. So we don't know who is going to pay to whom. So I think that all this digital ID that we are talking about is very important to work on, very important, because if the payment is disappearing of the usage, I would say, it still has a value, and we still need to protect the consumer about fraud, and the merchant also about fraud. So the regulation has to go as fast as the innovation, but also without killing it. If we kill the innovation and the regulation is too strong, then all the skills are going to go away from Europe. So what I would like to sum up, instantaneity, real time, and also a good pace with the regulation to help innovation, do the action.
We absolutely need the invisible transaction. We've spoke about it all throughout today, but that invisible transaction needs to be seamless. And today, JP Morgan, we took a majority stake in Volkswagen Payments, and what we're trying to do is continue to make the car the device rather than the app on your phone. So regardless of the charging station you go to, you can connect the car. But it's a very complex thing because you have to onboard a lot of different merchants and you have to tie it together. So Mark, I'm hoping we can get you something to see for your next holiday. But I think that we still have a lot of way to go. I think the SCA, from our perspective, it's on the merchant acquirer, not the merchant. So if you're a merchant and you have a low fraud rate, you should be rewarded rather than choosing your acquirer, who's essentially the ones that's fraud rate is driving on the SCA. And I think that the reason we have the SCA is because of fraud, and it's to protect the individual. And if we could protect that individual and make sure that we know who they are at the time of making the transaction, then it truly can become invisible. I also agree on the points on data. I think data needs to be contextual. And what I mean by that is exactly to the panel before, is having consumers determine what data they're comfortable sharing, and having it to be secure. And I think banks have done a really good job on it, and I think we should continue. And I think partnership with regulators on things like GDPR, I truly believe we are leading the way. And I don't look at it as bad regulation. I look at it as standards and leading the world.
Maybe one thing, because otherwise people think my only problem is my electric car and charging it. We need to think about a few things. We're now so successful that we need to start thinking about what happens if the infrastructure falls apart. And you see what happens if, let's say, electricity installations are under attack. Well, not really under attack, but let's say they need fuel that needs to come from somewhere. What happens then? So that is point one. The other one is cyber fraud and everything that has been mentioned. That's the other side of the thing. Whether it's the metaverse or whatever, you can see even I think I'm a specialist. Well, I'm not a real specialist, but at least closer to this stuff. At least I need to pay attention where I push a button, when I push a button, and I can't blame my parents for some time said, yeah, well, it was logical and there was a question from the bank and that's what I did. It's going to happen everywhere. So that's the other side. That's actually the other side of our successful coin. So we have a huge successful coin. If you compare where we're coming from 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where we're standing now. So it's not only looking at the last things that we can change and can improve, but let's make sure we manage our risks in that sense.
And if I would share, and maybe as a closing remark, my hope is that basically in 10 years from now, we can all come back here and we can celebrate the fact that the EPC has solved all of these problems for us. Probably us working with the EPC. So with this, I would like to close this session with a heartfelt applause for Jason, Isabelle, Sara, and Mark. Thank you a lot.